So thank you very much. Thank you for waiting for Belt Hacks with Baronessa Isabel. Thank you.
Well, hello, it's lovely to see you all here. This class is very much an introduction to making late 16th century Spanish belts. It is not designed as an academic exercise. This is looking at tips and tricks that I have figured out over the last mumble years of Spanish costuming, including a couple of issues that I've discovered along the way, a few cheats, a few plausibly period solutions, and I'm just going to share them with you. There are spaces within this PowerPoint that I'm going to share that are natural places for questions, so I'm just going to plough through until I get to one of those. At that point, I'm happy to answer any questions, and there'll be some space at the end too, I imagine, because as I said, this is not a long class. So I'm just going to attempt to share my screen now. Okay, here we go. So this class is broken down into basically two areas. We've got making the belts and wearing them. Because we don't necessarily have access to the stunning belts that we see in portraiture, for example, this one on the right of Isabel of Valmar, we are having to make compromises in the materials that we use. And those compromises quite often have impacts on the way the belts themselves wear or the way they move. So that's what this is going to look at. If we look at these three stunning portraits from the era, we can see three very similar styles of belts that are all clearly different. And when you get a chance to zoom into these sorts of belts, you can see that they are made from gold and emeralds and rubies and pearls and all of these amazing actual gems and precious metals that of course are going to be very, very heavy. And when you look at some of them, it is quite clear they are manufactured in a shape. So they are designed to sit in this specific shape. So that is something that we are going to look at emulating with the materials that we have. But because we don't necessarily have access to national treasuries like these ladies did back in the day, we don't tend to have access to the golds and the precious gems. So what can we do? Well, for example, I sometimes like to, I'm just having a bit of a technical hitch here. Oops. The first one I'm going to look at is linked plaques or linked medallions. And here is the same belt several years apart based on several disastrous experiments, which we'll go into. So the first thing is that you want your belt to sit smoothly around the bottom edge of your doublet or your saya. And in order to get it to sit smoothly, you do need to shape it. Otherwise, you end up with it trying to pleat itself over your hips, or something strange happens at the center front, which you will see later. Generally, what I do is I will take my doublet pattern, I will trace the bottom edge of it. That's the sewing edge, not the cutting edge. And I will measure out my intended width of the belt. And there's just an example there. And then I start playing with different medallions or plaques that I might have in my collection at the given time. At this point, I will quite often try the paper belt on over top of my dress to make sure that things sit in the right place and that it's smooth, that there are no locations where it's going to tear, there are no locations where it wants to pleat. It's just nice and smooth and sits roughly where I want it to. Sorry. For the decoration, use your imagination. This picture is a small selection of the images, of the items I could grab without having to uncover too much of my spare room. You can see, for example, this bit here is a belt that I have pearled up to try and make it look a little bit less sparse. Oh, lost it. There was a bracelet, this was a necklace, that was about 12 bracelets, this was a brooch, you might recognize it from the previous belt. Again, we've got another bracelet over here and a selection of buttons. Whatever you've got, whatever you can access, have fun basically. That and a bunch of beads and you can make yourself an amazing belt. You're only limited by how you can actually link them together. So the first thing I tried was buttered rings, because these were easy to find and they were cheap and really easy to use. I had 2 pairs of pliers, problem solved. They were also quite discreet. They didn't stand out as part of the belt. The downside was, as you can see in this image, this one here completely lost its gold very, very quickly. And you will note that there are 3 rings on this side, 2 rings on that side. There's supposed to be 5 on each side. They open easily, they either drop out or your whole belt falls down. I cannot recommend the latter. It is embarrassing and annoying. Split rings are another option, and these are fantastic. They're supposed to be easy to find, but in my attempts, I haven't been able to find them in either fishing stores or our local haberdashery shops. This here is actually a collar that was given to me many years ago. This is not one of my belts. This is well beyond my skill set to acquire these kind of things. The one time I did find some split rings was to make that belt I showed earlier, and what actually happened was the ring was stronger than the muck metal that was used to make the jewellery, and it snapped pieces off the brooch. So that was a little bit of an annoyance, and I know from wearing this that it does leave scratches on the satin and silk of my dresses. So that's another downside of split rings, but also the buttered rings. My most recent solution is making these wee twisted loops. The material is really easy to acquire. It's just beading wire of whatever thickness goes through your bead or your hole in your plaque. They are very, very easy to make. Just takes a little bit of practice to get them not looking terribly uneven. But that wasn't huge. I found them to be really secure. They have not come undone in the 10 years since I made them. They also can scratch up the fabric a little bit, but I've found the easiest way to prevent that is to arrange to ends of the wires back into the beads, or just to file them off so that they've got no sharp edges on them, and that reduces the damage there. So that is making a belt from plaques. Oh, one last one, of course, tiger tail. I don't use this. I use it for necklaces, but I don't use it for belts, because I found that once you start getting a meter length of this, it gets quite unwieldy, it gets twisty, it doesn't sit nicely, it just really annoys me. So I tend to restrict this to necklaces. The other thing is, if the tiger tail should break and you've forgotten to put crimps at locations throughout, you end up with all of your precious medallions and gems all over the floor. Again, not something I recommend. So that was the plaques. Did we have any questions from Link Plaques there?
Lenore says that secondhand shops are a good place for little tiddly bits.
Oh, totally.
And Michael said, since you mentioned collars, do these techniques you're describing here on jeweled belts translate for making collars of a state?
Absolutely. I use these same techniques for making necklaces, choker necklaces, and ones that sit down slightly lower as well. So absolutely. So the other technique I use that is actually my favorite these days is putting the medallions on a base. This is, I have no evidence that this is period, but it works really well within the SCA context. So your belt base will of course need to be shaped properly, and it needs to have sufficient support or strength to actually support the decorations that you're going to be sewing onto it. In the past, I've used straight and curved Petersham, but that's no longer available in Christchurch here in New Zealand. Despite running around frantically for 3 or 4 years now, nobody has had it in. So I've had to start using canvas, just straight up canvas. And what I've taken to doing with that is, because you are curving it over your hip, you can get some substantial distortion in the shape of the belt. So it is really important that you use multiple layers of canvas, cut on the straight grain and also the bias. That will eliminate the bias stretch that you're going to get in the different locations. And I just quilt it together with my machine quite haphazardly. I tried doing it by hand, but I found the difference in the quality was not substantial. But my advice is to sew the length of the belt by machine, not across the width. That way you don't get bubble showing up. Usually I will hide my industrial strength canvas base by putting something over it. In this case, it was a piece of bias binding. In other cases, I've used silk. I've used just plain old cotton, actually, and then started sewing the elements down through the whole lot. My advice is sew individual elements and small groups together and not frequently. One of the great advantages of this style of belt manufacture is that you can apply a back to the belt and completely hide all the sewing. That, of course, is also the downside, because if anything falls off, you then have to unpick a whole heap of sewing in order to get to the repair that you need to make. But it's working quite well. You can see here that I've stitched down each element twice. And when I stitched down the pearls, I went through the pearl, through the silver spacer, through the next pearl and down. And then I've also done a loop thread going over that thread. That makes sense, between the pearls and the spacers, just to stop them wobbling too much. Otherwise, you can find gravity gets involved with your belt and the bottom elements will sag off the base a little bit. But it's not huge, it's just a picky detail.
We had a question, is could you use kid leather?
Probably. Give it a go and let me know. I'm always looking for improvements. The other way that I have recently started experimenting with, due to being on a substantial budget, is the same technique they used to apply buttons to military jackets in the Victorian era. I don't know whether this was done in period or not, but it is brilliant for allowing you to reuse your ouches on multiple items. So as you can see here, you stick a hole through your base using an awl and whatever arm strength you've got. You then push the shank of your button through that hole and then thread a wire or a thick cord through the holes that are now on the back of the belt. In order to replace them, all you need to do is pull out that wire or that cord, pop your belt, your ouches out, and you are ready to replace them. It means it is very, very easy to replace anything that breaks. It means that you don't need so many individual ouches to make a whole wardrobe of belts. It just takes a little bit of time to move them from one to the other. The downside I have found is that with the shank itself pushing through the belt, you then end up with a ridge down the middle of the belt, which causes things to sit a little bit less stably. So what I will probably do when I make this beyond just the testing it on students phase, I will put either padding on the back or something just to even out that shape. So that's the construction section. Are there any other questions there? Nope. Okay. So we're sort of looking at the wearing point of view now. And I said this is a short class. We're over halfway through. For securing the belt, you'll see here I've got 3 pictures of my current favourite belts and how I secure them. Ribbon ties. These are by far my favourite. They are really inexpensive. You can use whatever ribbon you've got lying around. In that down there, the white one that I'm wearing, I do wish I had changed it out to white ribbon. But you live and you learn. Because the belt has got some flexibility in the way it is worn, it means that you can swap it between as many different gowns as you've got that have the same line to the bottom of your doublet. In fact, you can go with slightly shallower or slightly deeper V's as well, within reason, and all it takes is you tie the bow at a slightly different place on the ribbon. It allows fluctuation in weight if you're wearing the likes of a Mongol Trançado that's got that loose back on it. You just, again, tie it slightly longer or slightly shorter as you need it. I found from experience that a wider ribbon tends to sit more securely, and it also fills up the space at the back a little bit better. One of the huge advantages of using a ribbon tie is that you can get away with slightly fewer ouches or beads or medallions. That can save you a little bit of money if you're dropping your entire Christmas or birthday gift on something from, for example, Truly hats. I would advise against using satin ribbons because in my experience they tend to worm their way undone, usually at inopportune moments. And cotton tape, on the other hand, is absolutely fabulous. It stays put, but it can look a little budget when it is next to satins and silks. So it's entirely your call what you want to use, and just experiment and play with what you like. The other fastening options that I have played with, I don't have any examples. I ransacked the school costume that I had in my classroom and could not find my half-made belts that I'd done. So you're going to have to do with some made-up pictures at the last minute. Now, trouser hooks, just in case you don't know what they are, there is a picture showing an approximate placement on the belt. Oh, I got that wrong. The wee bar should be further back from the edge, otherwise you're going to get the tail end of your trouser hook showing. Or you can put that the actual hook part on the outside edge so that it's actually going to be hidden by the fabric, would actually be the easier way to do that. These guys are cheap. They are really secure. They are quite discreet as long as you place them correctly. If you fold over the hooks slightly more, they don't come undone when they get bumped. So that is very, very convenient. The downside is that they only fit for one dress at this point. They only fit for one weight as well. If you're doing costumes for, say, a school production, you can put multiple bars on, but then you get flappy ends hanging out, and generally it's easier just to move the bar. For the button and buttonhole, it's exactly as suggested. You can make it so that your buttonhole goes over a button that is part of your belt decoration, or you can, of course, do it so it's entirely hidden so you can't see anything. Oh, is there a question?
Yep. How about grosgrain ribbon?
Grosgrain ribbon doesn't generally have the same structural integrity as Petersham. It's great for covering up the edge, the back of the belt, and I've used it repeatedly for that. But I've found when I've tried to make a belt out of it, it actually tends to collapse in on itself and rotate in a way that Petersham doesn't.
Would it be okay for ties?
Oh, possibly. It's not one I've used because the grosgrain ribbon we tend to get here in New Zealand is very brittle feeling, and when you tie it, it is. I don't like the crunchy feeling of it, but go for it. Right, those are my fastening options. So here is hitherto unseen pictures showing my dreaded belt droop from history. Gravity can cause belts to shift significantly just by standing there. That red dress, that is what happened between 3 photographs. The belt just slid where it was going. And the brocade dress, I thought I'd done enough shaping on that one, but as you can see, gravity again pulled it into a wide U shape. Very frustrating when you've put a lot of time into it. So what can we do to avoid this particular problem? Well, you can pin it in place with straight pins, and this is perfectly adequate. Do make sure you hide the ends of the pins, otherwise there's a good chance you will catch your elbow on them. And again, if somebody does put their hand on your waist without permission and get stabbed by it, it's, you know, their own problem. You can also use hooks. For example, I have got different numbers of hooks on different belts to go with different dresses, and we thread loops on the dresses. So you can see down the bottom, there's just a wee buttonholed thread loop on my most recent Mongil Trançado. In fact, there are 2 of them, depending on the different belts that I want to wear with it. They are discreet, nobody really notices them, even when the belt does come unpopped, which doesn't happen very often. And it just holds everything in place. There have been other suggestions, for example, putting thin ties on the back of the belt and putting eyelet holes in the dress itself so that you can thread through from the back. Personally, I find that annoying because I tend to make these dresses front opening and my belts are back opening. I could swap that. And then it would involve faffing around on the inside of a dress. Usually when you're trying to get over the claustrophobia of putting on a corset and or a pair of bodies and a kirtle and a doublet, you're starting to overheat. So I don't want something that's going to take time there. The other thing that is quite handy for positioning belts, especially on a Mongil Trançado, is side slits in the gown. So, oops. This is the waistline at the right-hand side of my most recent Mongil Trançado. So you can see the waist tabs there. And then you can see the watto back, or the waterfall back, that is just on the very edge of the gown there. You can see the seam where that attaches to the front of the skirt. I tend to make a little gap in the side of my Mongils, specifically to allow the belt to go through, so that the belt is tied up right next to the false back of the bodice, and it doesn't then impede the flow of that gorgeous long line back that you can see. It helps keep the side of the belt in the right place, but it doesn't necessarily fix the front of the belt, which is why I have a combination of the belt loops that you can actually just see on the right of the photo and the slit itself. And here you can see 2 photos of me in various gowns with belts that are sitting securely so that I don't have to worry about them, using these different tips and tricks that I've discovered along the years, the shaping and the securing them in place. If you want to know anything more about these, please feel free to visit my website or have a look at the Amber Hearth Pinterest boards, or you could follow us on Instagram. There will be the occasional picture there. So I'm just going to pop back to the previous slide and answer any questions you've got.
Okay, Aloria says, what's your favorite glue for gluing Kobakan, sorry, to metal?
Aberrations?
Yeah, sorry.
Whatever I can get my hands on, really. I've heard of this mythical jeweler's glue, but I've never been able to get my hands on it. So I do tend to use whatever's there. I've used Loctite, which is super glue of various points. I've never moved to 2-part araldite because, frankly, they're stinky, and after my chemistry degree, I have a bit of a susceptibility to solvents. But I tend to try and buy things that have already got the capuchins attached. Are there any more questions?
I do not see any more questions. Is there any more questions? Oh, well, here's another one. Michael, in the terms of these styles of belt, I would presume that they are not particularly load-bearing, i.e. not really enough to support a rapier or a dagger.
These particular ones, definitely not. If I was going to make a belt to support the likes of a rapier or a dagger, I would use a standard belt, leather belt blank as my base. Shaped, obviously, but then I would probably use the make a hole, push the button or the ouch through to the other side and secure it with a cord. If I was going to make something that was more load bearing.
Could you go to the next slide for the Pinterest board?
Oh, absolutely.
Somebody said, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge.
Glad to.
And any more questions? What would be appropriate for catting a book of hours?
I don't know.
Carrying a book of hours. Carrying. I didn't know what catting was, so okay, carrying a book of hours.
Generally speaking, with the gowns that I'm mostly interested in recreating that these belts go with, they don't have anything dependent off the belt. So that's outside my knowledge at this point.
Okay. Okay, any more questions? Oh, here we go. This is for Michael again. Would those belt blanks be able to achieve these kinds of shapes? I have seen that general shape as standard for men's sword belts, but mostly commercially available sits pretty horizontally. And thank you for answering all my questions.
You're welcome, Michael. I would suggest that because a lot of the belt blanks that you do buy at the big wars, from my limited experience, do tend to be straight, it might be worth buying a hide of the right weight of leather to support what you want to depend from it, and then cutting the shape yourself. For lots of shapes, for lots of belts.
Yeah, if you're going to get a whole hide, find friends.
Exactly.